The calf that was yesterday, I was saying that the calf is pooping out his intestinal lining. Yesterday, this morning, the calf actually did die. The calf did die this morning. And so, as far as I can see it, as far as I see, that's about the end of the BRD. I was having some pretty severe BRD outbreak, and I attribute that, I took a look at it, and I believe that I was having the BRD outbreak because, number one, I did not, the main reason was because I stopped doing metaphylaxis. All right. And before before I started doing metaphylaxis, this was pretty common, and this was actually what was happening. And that's why I tried metaphylaxis. And when I did metaphylaxis, it helped a lot with my cattle health program. And so I believe that this animal that passed away, this animal that died, is the last animal with BRD that I had. And I attribute the BRD to me not using metaphylaxis. Okay, I believe that the reason that I had the BRD outbreak was because I was not giving a metaphylaxis dose of antibiotics when the animals first got here. And and I've spoken about this. The whole thing about buying cattle from the sale barn is that when you buy cattle from a sale barn, you are disproportionately more likely to buy an animal with a problem, right? There is a there's a, and I've always said that there's about a somewhere around a 10 to 20% chance that you're buying an animal that somebody sold because that animal was giving them a lot of problems, and so they sold that animal, right? About 1 out of 10 of your animals, about 1 out of 20 of your animals are just gonna have are gonna be whatever, right? They're gonna about 1 out of 15 animals are just gonna have a lot of problems. And the thing is that and I think that the big reason why that this occurred was because I didn't do metaphylaxis. And so and I wanted to go over everything because I believe that the BRD outbreak is over. I believe that the BRD outbreak is over. I don't have any other calves that are showing signs of severe illness, and so I believe that the BRD outbreak is over. And tomorrow morning I'll actually be liquidating more calves. And the thing about it, and if I was gonna go over it in terms of the entirety of the situation, and I've spoken about this, right? The whole thing about losing an animal, I don't care about the money. Okay, the money is negligible. The way that I structure my business, the way that I structure my balance sheet is effectively to keep me in the net positive all the time. All right. And as my balance sheet grows, the amount of net positive that I have is pretty drastic. Like as of today, the amount of net positive that I have is pretty drastic. I have 42 animals right now, right? I have 42 animals, and let's say that my baseline animals are 50, and I have 42 animals, all right? If I have 42 animals, and you also need to understand that I still have enough money in the bank account to buy 3 more animals, all right? So, and I got 14 animals in the front. So that leaves me with 28 animals in the back, right? These 28 animals, even if I sold just these 28, and the 12 animals in the front have also gone up in value, all right, I would say that they've about doubled their weight. Even now, I could still increase the size of my business by about 70%, okay? I could still go from having 42 to having about maybe 75 or 80 animals, all right? So, I mean, in terms of a monetary, and this is also why I go over my financial strategy so often, all right? Because, and I've always said that when you talk, like when you have the average person, the reason that you don't ask the average person about money is because they will say ridiculous things, right? They will say ridiculous things. And I'm not saying this to, I'm not saying this to be a prick about it. I'm just saying a lot of people, when it comes to money, just absolutely ridiculous things, right? And, all sorts of ridiculous things. Oh, my God, and I've always, and the problem with being poor, and I've spoken about this, I speak about this all the time. The big problem with being poor is that when you have a poor person, they will hold on to being poor for the rest of their life. They will never leave the realm of poorness. I guarantee it. It's almost guaranteed. And this is also why I say, it's more important that you learn to not be poor from the very beginning. Because if you are taught to be poor, you will hold on to being poor for the rest of your life. I guarantee it. All right, I guarantee it. It's almost guaranteed. It doesn't matter what your reasoning is. If you're poor, you're poor. All right, it just is what it is. All right. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It's not some debatable thing. All right. It doesn't matter what your reason is. It's probably even pathetic. All right. Don't ask poor people what to do with money. All right. That'd be like that'd be like me asking a hooker about God. All right. I'm not gonna say about God. About religion. All right. It's not. It's just. Don't ask a poor person about money. Okay. They're not gonna know. All right. And I'm saying this with the utmost sincerity. I mean, in terms of money, the big thing, and I go over my financial strategies all the time. How do I keep myself away from bankruptcy? Right? What do I do with my money? And I feel like now is a good time to, go over this idea because, I did lose a portion of my balance sheet. But I've always spoken about the whole thing about the balance sheet. And in all honesty, if I have enough money in my bank account right now to buy 3 animals and my balance sheet is 70% leveraged, I have the perfect amount of leverage, right? That means if I went and I bought 3 more animals, I would also leverage for 3 more animals. So I would effectively be right back at 48. I have enough money to buy 3 to 5 animals. All right, so let's say 4. So I'd be right back at 50 and my balance sheet would be 70% leveraged. All right. The money, it doesn't, and I set up my financials like this for a reason. Okay. I set up my financials like this for a reason. It is to effectively protect me from bankruptcy at all times. All right. I don't ever get close to bankruptcy. Ever. All right. And I talk about this in terms of a fundamental idea. If you are budgeting every dollar that you have, if you are legitimately using every dollar that you have, that is not good. It doesn't matter why you're doing it. All right. Nobody cares about your reason, especially not me. Okay. Nobody, it does not matter. It does not matter why you're doing it. If you are legitimately using every dollar that you have, then congratulations. In terms of a fundamental idea, that is not good. That is not good. That is a horrible thing to do with money. If you are legitimately using every dollar that you have, okay? And I give you my financial strategies. How do I use my financials, right? When I have money, I purchase a tax-deductible asset. I purchase this tax-deductible asset at its appraisal value, and I purchase this asset with the intentions of appreciating the value of the asset. And when I appreciate the value of the asset significantly, I will determine how much I should pay myself, and then I will pay myself that amount of money. All right, I don't sit around with money. Large amounts of money, why would I do that? It's not going to do anything. Money's not going to do anything, right? I would rather have an asset. If anything, you're going to lose money because of taxes and inflation, all right? And so, but that's how I utilize capital. All right. I don't ever get close to bankruptcy ever. All right. I don't ever put myself, at risk of bankruptcy. I just don't do it. OK. The whole thing about it is, and I give you my strategies for how to do it. Right. Invest your capital first. Once your capital is invested and it is stabilized, granted that we're talking about the cattle business, if we're talking about the S&P 500, and I've always spoken, the whole thing about this, about, having the different levels of investing, right? The S&P 500 is a very, very, very entry level investment. All right. If you're buying, and I've even spoken about this, but you have to understand that when you're talking about making large sums of money, like when you're talking about making money like me, when you look at my farm and you're talking about making money like me, you have to understand that something like this is a borderline 0% success rate. Okay. I mean, we're talking about 0.000000001%. And so when I speak about my numbers and I tell you about my financials, the whole thing about it is that I don't want people's eyes rolling over into the back of their head. Okay. I don't want, oh my God, he's out of touch with reality. Here's the thing. All right. I've actually worked for minimum wage, right? And I didn't start getting paid farming until my 12th year. All right. And this is effectively my 15th year. All right, and so it is. If you want to die poor, and I've always said, if you're poor, you're gonna die poor, and if that is legitimately how you think, then have fun dying poor. Nobody cares. All right, don't take anybody else down with you. All right, and when I talk about my numbers, I just the whole thing about it is I don't want people's eyes rolling over into the back of their head, and I've always said that the entry level, if you really want to just get started investing and you want to make a difference in your life with investing, you need to purchase at least $2,000 worth of the S&P 500 every month. Realistically, you should be going for 5,000. All right, realistically, you should be going for 5,000. If you start purchasing $2,000 worth of the S&P 500 every month, if you start doing that, that is the entry level for doing better for yourself. All right, that is a very, very basic investment. Chances are you understand the S&P 500 is just a small equitable stake in the 500 biggest companies in America. That's it. All right, if you purchase $2,000 worth of the S&P 500 every month for the rest of your life, that's the entry level. That's entry level. All right, that's entry level investing. If you actually want to make a difference with your life by buying the S&P 500, realistically, we need to be talking about 5,000. You need to be purchasing about $5,000 worth of the S&P 500 every month, okay? And in terms of high-level investing, now we're talking about you're buying assets intentionally with the intentions with increasing the value of the asset, right? And when you're intentionally increasing the value of the asset, you need to find a way to add value onto that asset. All right, and that's effectively what I do in the cattle business. You do not need to go into the cattle business to make money like me. I make more money as a farmer in my backyard than anybody on the planet makes doing anything, just about, and it is by a massive margin. Just to put things in perspective, I would be willing to bet I have to take another set of animals to market tomorrow. I would be willing to bet that I make over $40,000 in the next 30 days, over 40 grand. I would be willing to bet I make over 40 grand. And guess what? I would also be willing to bet that my income goes upwards. I may even double that number by the end of the year. I would be willing to bet. All right, I would be willing to bet. And when you take a look at it in terms of a numerical sense, you need to understand when I talk about, you need to put $5,000 worth of the when I talk about you need to put $5,000 in all honesty, the average person needs to put in about $5,000 a month into the S&P 500 to make a financial difference in their life. And I've always spoken about this. If you're going to throw a pissy fit, have fun dying poor. All right, do it or die in the process. Legitimately, there is no, oh my God, how am I supposed to make 5,000? Nobody cares. All right, you either do it or you die poor. Have fun. Legitimately, I don't think you understand that. A lot of people don't understand the situation that we're in right now. A lot of people are absolutely going to get devastated. I can almost guarantee it. Over the next 25, 30 years, the average person is going to get absolutely devastated. All right, we're already in a situation where, effectively 90, the goalpost has already moved. All right, and the whole thing about this, and the whole thing about it is that when you take a look at my business, you need to understand that when it comes to my business, like how much capital do I invest into my business on a monthly basis, all right? And just to put things in perspective, and the thing is, when I give you my numbers, I'm not bragging about it. All right, I'm not being whatever about it. I'm just telling you it is an objective fact. All right, the thing is, okay, like me, if I go and I sell cattle, right? If I go and I sell cattle, let's say I sell 20 animals and I make enough money to buy 40. All right, let's say I sell 20 animals. Let's say I sell 15 animals and let's say I sell 16 animals. Let's just say I sell 16 animals and I make enough money to buy 30, okay? If I sell 16 animals and I make enough money to buy 30, I do not invest 30. I invest 44. All right, I put about $40,000 a month, just, that's how much I invest, okay? I legitimately invest about 150% of my income. All right, and at the end of the day, it just is, when you take a look at my situation, when you take a look at my financials, you have to understand that I effectively have some of the best financials on the entire planet. All right, I legitimately, honest to God, invest about 150% of my income. All right, $5,000 is nothing. And I don't know how else, I don't know how else to put it. I'm not looking to sound like an arrogant person, $5,000 a month is nothing. All right, you can eat, if I only had $5,000, I could easily turn that $5,000 into $100,000 in 2 years, just farming cattle, no problem. $5,000 is a minuscule amount of money. If you make $5,000 a month nowadays, you're probably practically homeless. All right, you have to find a way to make more money. We should not be in a city, but I mean, the middle class will effectively always be the middle class. All right, and even if I increase the success rate, right, I've spoken about this, even if I manage to increase the success rate, even if I increase the success rate by 1,000%, even if I did that, there may only be 10 people on the, I may be the only person on the entire planet that does something like this, the only one. I legitimately started myself a commercial cattle farm in my backyard, and I legitimately make about $40,000 a month, and my income is actually going upwards. I may be the only person on the entire planet that does something like this. I legitimately made more money as a farmer in my backyard than anybody on the planet made doing anything. And it was by a lot. All right, I actually did it. Now, nobody cares, and I've always said, if you're poor, you're going to die poor, and you're also probably kind of pathetic. All right, you're not poor because you're a good person. You're not poor because you have a bunch of friends. Well, you probably are poor because you have a bunch of friends. All right, if you should go out into the world and actually learn to become useful, right? Actually learn how to do something. Learn how to do something extremely well. When it comes to farming, I legitimately may be one of the most capable farmers on the entire planet. If I was legitimately put in the middle of nowhere, Central Texas, by myself, with $5,000, and you came back a year later, I would easily have turned that $5,000 into, I may have even turned it into over $100,000 within 1 year. All right, it is what it is, and at the end of the day, I mean, what does it matter to me? All right, the whole thing about it is that, I'm not particularly happy that when I look into the world, I legitimately don't see anybody doing 10%. I'm not particularly happy about that. Even if I increase the success rate by 1,000%, there may only be 10 people on the entire planet that does something like this. Legitimately, only 10 on the entire planet. All right, I can almost guarantee it. And at the end of the day, I actually managed to do it, right? Like, the whole thing about this is that I actually managed to do it. This was not a magical journey for me. I'm not giving you my opinion. All right, I legitimately managed to make enough money on this backyard to buy anything on the entire planet. That's, like, when you take a look at my financial situation, when you take a look at what I'm doing, you have to understand that I legitimately am in a situation where I do not worry about money at all. That's what you're looking at. And I've spoken, if you go and you buy yourself a 20-acre field and you run 250 cattle a year, well, realistically, you have to run about 300 to, maybe about 350, right? 300 to 400. I run about 150 to 200 cattle a year on this 10.5-acre field. And when I do that, I actually achieve commercial standards, right? I actually achieve commercial standards. And I do this with very low overhead because I am able to grow grass, right? I effectively grow grass 8 to 9 months out of the year, right? And that keeps my overhead very low. I have minimal to zero machinery. All right, the whole thing, when you take a look at how I have my balance sheet, when you take a look at my business, you need to understand that this business, the farmland, the land, the cattle, none of this costs me any money. None of this costs me anything. All of this makes me a massive sum of money. Massive. I mean, if I were, I would be willing to bet that I make over $40,000 in the next 30 days. None of this costs me anything. That's what you're looking at, right? That's the whole thing. When I show you my farm, I am legitimately showing you a financial situation. I legitimately do not worry about money at all. 0%. None of this costs me anything. My balance sheet is very far in the net positive. I'm about 70% leveraged on my balance sheet, and I'm liquidating animals. And when I liquidate animals, I will realize my gains. And when I realize my gains, I realize my gains off of my biggest animals, all right? I don't go and sell my smallest calf. All right, and realistically, the most realistic way for me to put it is, let's say I go and I sell 10 animals, right? If I sell 10 animals and I'm leveraged 1-for-1 on the number of animals that I have, when I sell these 10 animals, I will effectively owe the bank 5 animals worth of money, and I will have my 5 animals worth of money, but there will be an unrealized gain value on these 10 animals, right? So when I sell these 10 animals and I make enough money to buy 20, then I have realized my gains, right? So now I have 15 animals worth of my own money, and I have 5 animals worth of the bank's money. I pay the bank back their 5 animals worth of money. I take my 15 animals worth of money. I invest the capital. I stabilize the asset, and then I leverage against the number of assets that I have. When I stabilize the asset, there is an increase in the value of the asset. All right, and then I leverage against the number of assets that I have, but I do not leverage against the unrealized gain. The unrealized gain is the safety buffer for my business. It's the safety buffer for me taking leverage, right? That's how I run my balance sheet. And when I do that effectively all the time, it grows my balance sheet. I don't worry about money ever. I'm not worried about money ever. 0%. I'm not concerned about money at all. Legitimately, money is negligible to me. In all honesty, I'm probably net positive, I don't even know. I mean, like if I was legitimately gonna just take, okay, if I just took the money that I made in my business, right, and I put it back into my business, if I just did that, even then my business would grow by more than 10% every single month. More than 10%. It might even be more than 20%. The cattle are equitable. If I'm not taking any more leverage, if I'm legitimately not taking any more leverage, and I'm selling, maybe I'd sell, 15 animals, 15 animals a month, right? Let's just say 14 to make it easy. So I owe the bank 7 and I have 7, and I'm probably net positive, somewhere around $15,000 and $20,000 a month. All right, I probably have about $20,000 a month left over after I've paid for everything. And this is also what I've spoken about. The cost of my business is effectively negative 15 grand. My business costs me negative $15,000, okay? That's how much it costs me. This does not cost me anything. That's the whole idea of having assets and producing returns on your assets, right? That's the whole idea. Like when you take a look at what I'm doing, right? When you take a look at my business, when you take a look at my assets, I've always said that the way that you can tell if somebody, and I've always said that, the whole thing is look at their assets, right? Look at their assets, because people will say whatever and people will whatever, but at the end of the day, the assets are the assets, right? It just is what it is. Like when you take a look at my business, right? When you take a look at my business, it just is what it is, right? I grew my business by over 1,000% in the last 2.5 years. I legitimately grew my business by over 1,000%. How much cash flow do I anticipate that I will produce over the next 30 days? About 40 grand. All right, I'll probably produce about $40,000. How much is my overhead, right? Maybe about $5,000 a month. My overhead is maybe 5 grand. So if maybe my business costs me 5 grand. Everything in total costs me 5 grand, right? So if I make $40,000 and it costs me $5,000, I just take the $5,000 out of the $40,000 that I make. And then I take the rest of the money and I buy more assets with it. Why do I do that? Because when I do that, when I purchase these assets and I purchase them at their appraisal value, I get a tax write-off and I can knowledgeably appreciate the value of the asset, right? Very simple. All right, it's not complicated. That is legitimately how I run my balance sheet. That is how I run my business, right? I actually do this in real life. And that's, the whole thing about it is, the whole thing, if you have legitimately become poor, and it's borderline pathetic, right? Legitimately, you're not poor because you're a good person, all right? You're not poor because you're some spectacular individual. You're probably poor because you're kind of an idiot. All right, and you're probably stuck being poor for the rest of your life. I guarantee it, and you don't want to become poor to begin with. All right, and when, and I show you, and I legitimately, I show you, and it's even, the whole thing about this is that even if I only had $5,000, if I only had $5,000, right, that was all that I had. And I've always said that the whole thing about being poor, and, and it's like, even me, like, if you took a look at my situation, even if I had nothing, if I only had $5,000, I could turn that $5,000 into $100,000 within 2 years, and it would not even be difficult. If anything, it would be very easy. Right? You take your $5,000, you invest it into an asset. When you purchase these assets, you purchase them at their appraisal value. At that point, you're not even spending any money. You're just taking your money and you're trading it for an asset that is equally as valuable as the money. You get a tax write-off for it. If you want to know what your tax situation is, go and talk to an accountant about it. Find an accountant that specializes in your line of work. Go and talk to your accountant about it. I purchased these assets. What does my tax situation look like? All right, and then at that point, you have your assets. You don't have any money, but you have your assets. You stabilize your assets, and then you leverage against them. And if we're talking about a small amount of money, like $5,000, I mean, realistically, I just leverage against it in the very beginning because, what does it matter? It's only $5,000. And if you did that, congratulations. If you just did that for the next 2 years, you would have more than $100,000. Granted that you actually, you actually did the work, right? I mean, you're going to have to grow the grass. I've always said grow the grass first. If you're legitimately looking to get into the cattle business, learn how to grow the grass first, all right? Learn how to grow the grass. Because if you cannot grow grass, you're effectively going to be relying on the commodity markets all the time to feed your animals. And at that point, you have entered the cattle feeding business. You are effectively trading commodities, all right? And if you're trading commodities and you get hit by a double whammy, congratulations, you're not going to make any money. Even if you do make money, you're not going to make very much money all the time. You're not going to make very much. There is one situation where you would make a large amount of money. And if the double whammy went the other way, if the cattle market went up and the feed costs went down at the same time, but now we're talking about a 33% success rate. Do you want to make money 33% of the time? Is that what you want to do, right? Not really. I mean, I wouldn't want to do that. Why would you want to? You would be in a miserable business. All right, you have to learn how to grow the grass first. All right, you grow the grass, you put your animals on it when the grass is ready. Then congratulations, even if you mess it up, which you probably will. All right, you cannot just go and just, grass does not just magically grow on its own. All right, you probably will mess it up, but even if you mess it up, it's like you only lost $250, right? You only lost $500. What does it matter? Try it again. When I fertilized 10.5 acres, it cost me about $350 to $500, all right, about 7 months out of the year. And when I grow that grass for that $3,500 investment, I legitimately grow enough grass to feed, I legitimately grow enough grass to feed about 3 or 4 500-pound animals per acre. All right, and I raise them to a commercial standard. All right, if you're legit, I say this with the utmost sincerity. If you are poor, you will hold on to being poor for the rest of your life, and it's borderline moronic and pathetic. Borderline. Like it's borderline like the most idiotic thing I have ever seen. Borderline pathetic. Why would you hold on to being poor? You could legitimately do anything. You could legitimately go off and you could even just be broke. Right? I mean, why would you choose to be poor? You know, it's like, you know, and even when I go and I show you these things, like this does not cost me anything. This does not cost me anything. This farm does not cost. I actually make enough money on this farm to never worry about money again. That's how much it costs me. This does not cost me anything. When I purchase my assets, I purchase them at their appraisal value. And if I purchase good assets at their appraisal value, I am just trading my money for something that is equally as valuable as the money, with the intentions of appreciating the value of the asset. All right, you don't want to end up in a situation where you've become poor. Because if you've become poor, it's already too late. I can almost guarantee it. You'll go and do ridiculous things. Like, oh my God, maybe, well, I should go and find other poor people and we should all just fiddle diddlies with each other because now we all feel better about being poor. Right? When in reality, spend your time doing, spend your time learning how to do something. Spend your time getting better at something. Why not spend your time actually improving your situation, right? Why not? And it doesn't have to be with farming, right? It does not have to be with farming. It does not have to be, you don't have to go and start yourself a cattle farm to become a multimillionaire. As far as I know, I'm the only one that's I don't even know anybody that even does 10%. I legitimately don't know anybody that does 10%. All right, I honestly don't. You don't have to become a cattle farmer to become wealthy. I managed to become wealthy by becoming a cattle farmer. I managed to do it, and I showed you how I did it. There are many ways to make money. Many ways. You could go into commercial real estate. You could go into residential real estate. You could go into the stock market. You could go into business acquisition. There are many ways to make money. There are many ways to make money. All right, and $5,000 a month is pennies. And this is also something, when I say, if you really need to put $5,000 a month into an investment to really push yourself, out of the middle class situation. When I say something like that, you have to understand that if you're legitimately looking to make, if you're legitimately looking to make any significant amount of money, you're effectively talking about entering the top portions of the entire U.S. economy, okay? You have to understand that the playing field is different. The people in this sector of the economy are different. They're probably not like your buddy pals. They probably, I'm going to say we, because technically I am part, I'm not going to say I'm wealthy because I make $40,000 a month. I'm not wealthy, but I am rich. I am significantly past upper middle class. Significantly past it, right? I don't worry about money at all. 0%. When you're talking about, like people in the upper percentages of the entire U.S. economy, you're not going to be talking about your buddy pals. Nobody cares about you and your friends. At the end of the day, what's gonna be important is, can you yourself as an individual make it? That's the most important thing. I guarantee it. When and I've always said that in terms of a realistic perspective, success is a one-man journey. It's a one-person journey. Nobody's going to go and become successful for you. Your opinions aren't going to make you successful. At the end of the day, it's going to turn into, can you or can you not do it? I guarantee it. And it's like, when I talk about the $5,000 a month, you have to put about $5,000 a month into an investment. Nobody cares. If you cannot do it, then nobody cares, and you can't do it. Have fun dying poor. You either find a way to do it or you don't, and then you die poor. If you do find a way to do it, congratulations. Now you're in the top 0.01% of the financial economy. I'm not, of just financials. And I've always said that in terms of money, there are benefits to making drastic sums of money. There are benefits to it, okay? There are, I give you, the whole thing about my, like when you take a look at my financial situation, right? When you take a look at what I'm doing, you have to understand that with what I am doing right here effectively, you know, it makes me such a large amount of money that I don't ever worry about money, ever. 0%. I am not concerned about money at all. That's how much money I make right now on this farm. I would be willing to bet that I make over I would be willing to bet that I make over $40,000 in the next 30 days. I would be willing to bet. All right, I legitimately do not worry about money at all. That's what you're looking at. All right, and that's the whole thing about it. I mean, either you make it or you don't. And if you don't make it, then you don't make it. All right, it's not like, oh my God, well, you know, I thought. Nobody cares what you thought. All right, you know, oh my God, it's unfair. Yeah, the world is unfair, and it's gonna be unfair forever. If you legitimately put me, if we started off on a fair footing, let's just say that we gave everybody a 10-acre field, right? We gave everybody a 10-acre field, and we just said, you know, everybody has a 10-acre field right now. Everybody has a 10-acre field, and everybody just get after it. We'll see what happens, right? I would effectively eat the entire planet alive. I guarantee it, I would effectively just make more money than everybody. And then now we're right back to where we are. Oh my God, it's unfair. He makes even 40 times. He makes 40 times more money than the average. He makes 50 times more money than the average. Oh my God, it's unfair, right? Now we're right back to exactly where we are. I guarantee it. If we put everybody on a 10-acre field on the planet, if we put everybody on a 10-acre field and gave everybody $5,000 and just said everybody have at it, I would effectively eat the entire planet alive. Guarantee it. I would be willing to bet. And then now we're right back to where we are, right? Oh my God, it's unfair. He makes over $500,000 a year. That's unfair. All right, we'd be right back here. All right, nobody cares about an opinion, you know, and nobody, you know, the world is gonna be unfair. What do you want me to do? Stop working, right? Right. I mean, you know, what's that gonna do, right? You know, this is all, you know, if you're poor, you're gonna die poor. I guarantee it. You will hold on to being poor forever. You know, you will never give up being poor, and it's borderline pathetic, it's borderline sad, and it's borderline moronic. You know, if you legitimately got to the 10% mark, you would never have to worry about money again. Legitimately, that's all you had to do was 10%. Because if you got to the 10% mark, you can practice for free. All right, you know, and in terms of fertilizing a 10.5-acre field, it costs me about $350 to $500, 7 months out of the year, for about $2,000, for about $3,000 a year. I legitimately grow enough grass to feed about, you know, 3 or 4 500-pound animals per acre, 7 to 8, 9 months out of the year. All right, and when I do that, you know, this whole, what you're looking at right now, this does not cost me anything. This doesn't cost me anything. All right, this makes me money. All right, that's the big idea. Use your assets to buy more assets, and your assets should be producing a positive return. That's the whole big idea. That's it. If you understand just that, if that is all you understand, then, you know, congratulations. You know, at least you're going in the right direction. Your assets do not cost anything. Your assets do not cost anything. Your assets make you returns, all right? That's the whole big idea, and that's also why I present ideas like, when you purchase an asset, make sure you actually have it appraised properly. Make sure you understand why your asset is worth what it's worth. Appraise your asset, purchase your asset at its appraisal value, and, you know, that's beginner level in investing. That's very, very, very entry level investing. When you start going into higher level investing, now we're talking about you're intentionally purchasing assets with the idea that you will increase the value of said asset. That's the big idea, and you probably even get tax benefits for doing it. That's the big idea, okay? If that is all you understand, then at least you're going in the right direction, all right? At least you're somewhat starting to fundamentally develop an idea of how to make money. And the most realistic way for me to put this is that this does not cost me anything. If I stopped farming, if I legitimately stopped farming, I would hemorrhage hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Legitimately, hundreds of thousands. I'm being completely, I would legitimately hemorrhage hundreds of thousands of dollars a year if I stopped farming. Farming does not cost me anything. That's the big idea. You know, it does not matter. It's not just farming, it's your assets in general, okay? Your assets, good assets, do not cost anything. They make positive returns, all right? And that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.